Considered by many as one of the worst primaries for Scout, the Backscatter is very similar to the Babyface's Blaster, where it gives one benefit and takes away too many. But unlike the Babyface's Blaster, which can be a very useful weapon, the Backscatter is not really a good weapon to be used by itself, at least for the purpose of how it's meant to be used. So in this video, I'm going to discuss what I think the best loadout for this weapon is and how I think it should be used by people who are just getting familiar with it. But first, let's discuss the stats of it. So the Backscatter does mini crits to targets when fired at their back from close range, it has a 34% clip size reduction, it does no random critical hits, and it is 20% less accurate. The only thing that the Babyface's Blaster and the Backscatter share in terms of stats is the 34% clip size reduction. Besides that, one thing that I really want to discuss is the 20% less accuracy that it has. If we take a look at the damage, it's all the same, so one pellet does 6 damage and therefore at medium range, if all pellets were to connect, it will do a total of 60 damage. So again, if we compare these numbers to say the scattergun over on the right side, it's all the same, except for one specific thing, the pellet spread. Now I'm going to be honest, I have no idea what these numbers mean. The TF2 wiki doesn't really have a dedicated page to pellet spread specifically for shotguns, but only hit scan. So I can really only assume that the higher the number is, the tighter the pellet spread is, and therefore that's how you maximize your damage. But I could be wrong. Either way, this goes to show that the Backscatter has potential to be a good weapon as long as you maximize your damage. So now I'm going to discuss how I would use it and what I would pair it off with. In one of my previous videos where I was using the Backscatter, I paired it off with the Mad Milk for no other reason than to help myself and my teammates out against a pyro. But as I continued using it, I started to pair it off with the Criticola and the Bonk Atomic Punch. And funny enough, I started to use this a lot more like how I would use the Babyface's Blaster, which is to use Bonk first and then get to the enemy spawn point. And it turns out that it worked a lot better than using the Criticola. Now, although you don't get to have the speed boost that comes with the Babyface's Blaster, you still get to retain the 133% speed that you have normally. Although that's not really a big deal, one thing that is your accuracy, because as mentioned before, you are 20% less accurate than normal. So let's say you're shooting a heavy from behind. One thing that you should try to avoid is shooting from a far distance. As you can see here, I was shooting at roughly medium range and did about 73 damage, but as I got gradually closer, I took another shot and did 123 damage. Although this wasn't exactly point blank range, that small distance in which I moved forward increased my damage by 50. So needless to say, the best way to use a shotgun is to get up close, especially ones that have a very large pellet spread, such as the Panic Attack. But unlike the Panic Attack, which is roughly a bit more consistent, the Backscatter is a lot more inaccurate and therefore requires more skill to use effectively. Of course, you're not going to have trouble if you're trying to destroy the engineer's teleporters at the enemy spawn, but that's if no one catches you, which is why it's very important to make sure very few if not no one is dead on the enemy team. And believe me, nothing is scarier than seeing a demo man or a soldier walk out and immediately seeing you. Though there are those occasions where the enemy just doesn't seem to care enough to fight you or don't even notice you, which means you can easily kill them. The point is, you just have to be a lot more careful when using this gun. I mean, just check this gameplay out. Although I managed to destroy the engineer's teleporter, as a result the heavy noticed me, so I thought it was a good idea to fight him. And although I was doing a lot of damage up close, he ended up surviving with 1 health remaining. Of course, I wasn't shooting him from behind or from point blank range for that matter, but I was still doing a lot of damage despite only having 4 shots. But regardless of how far I was, my damage will never be the same even if I stay at one position. But speaking of damage, I mentioned earlier in the video that I also used the Criticola with the Backscatter and that I didn't really find it all that useful. Now, I wouldn't say that it's completely useless, but I would say that it's not the best option for the Backscatter. And that's for multiple reasons. The first is that your mini crits do not stack up, so if you have the Criticola activated and you're shooting someone from behind, you're not going to do more damage, you're just going to do normal mini crit damage. The second reason is that you only have 4 shots, much like the Babyface's Blaster or the Shortstop. So even though you're going to be doing a bit more damage, you're also going to be reloading a lot more often. And finally, the last reason is the 20% accuracy reduction. This one really isn't that much of a big deal because most scout mains will always try to close the distance to deal the most amount of damage. However, the Backscatter almost demands you to get up close more often than not, and as a result, you may end up dying more frequently. So my take on the Criticola is, unless if you are good at dodging and coordination, I wouldn't recommend this for practical use. I would just stick to the bonk atomic punch because it's easier to use and more beneficial. So that's how I would use the backscatter if I was playing a scout. I know there's almost no difference between this and the Babyface's blaster video, but there's really not much to talk about this weapon. But regardless, I hope you found it somewhat useful and maybe it gave you some idea of how to use it. Anyways, have a good day.